Hey y'all, today I want to talk about the idea of essentiality when it comes to nutrition because I think it's something that often gets confused for people. We talk about nutrients that we get from our diet, but also how they work in our body, right? We use the word fat to talk about a thing that we need to eat as well as sort of an undesirable state or an undesirable way to look, right? We store fat and we eat fat. We also have protein in our muscles and yet we eat protein as well. Same thing with carbohydrates, all of these things. So there's a difference between how these things work in our body versus whether or not we need them in our diet, okay? So all of those things I mentioned, carbohydrates, fats, protein, as well as vitamins and minerals, these are all things that we need in our body for our body to function properly, but we may or may not actually need everything to come from our diet. When we talk about essential nutrients, we mean nutrients that if they didn't come from our diet, we would die. So a really great example actually that I'm going to start with is cholesterol. So in the not too distant past, we believed that dietary cholesterol had an impact on the cholesterol that was in our body. But we actually realized when we started to look at the science and started to pay attention that the body will make as much cholesterol as it needs. So if you eat a lot of cholesterol, your body actually makes slightly less cholesterol. If you don't eat as much cholesterol, your body makes more cholesterol. So whatever sets the set point for how much cholesterol you need, your body will make less or make more depending on how much you eat. So the amount of dietary cholesterol you eat actually has nothing to do with that cholesterol set point. And that was actually reflected recently in January of 2016. The 2015 Dietary Guidelines for Americans came out, and they finally removed the dietary restriction on cholesterol because they finally really looked at the science and really realized that the amount of cholesterol you eat from the diet has little impact on the amount of cholesterol in your body. So again, it's this confusion between what we're eating and what's actually happening within our body. So when we talk about essential nutrients, again, those are things that you have to eat from your diet. And by have to eat, I mean without them, you will die. And that's not me being hyperbolic or fear-mongering, it's true. Without certain nutrients, you will die if you don't have them in your diet. And mostly those are micronutrients. We have our vitamins. These are just examples, not all of them. But vitamin C, vitamin A, minerals, iron, calcium. And then also our macronutrients. Carbohydrates, we're going to talk about actually if those are essential in the diet. Protein, which get broken down into amino acids, and fat, which are fatty acids. And I realize with carbohydrates, often this gets broken down into glucose in the body. So, and these are called micronutrients versus macronutrients. What that really means is that we talk about these in terms of grams, and we talk about these in terms of like micrograms or milligrams. So it's that you need much less of these than these to survive, but you still, again, need both of them. It's just how much you need. That's why these are the micronutrients and these are the macronutrients. So when we take a look, we know that we need to get these ones from our diet. Pretty much all of the micronutrients we talk about, you're gonna need to eat. Your body cannot make them in-house. From the macronutrient side of things, there are certain amino acids and certain fatty acids that you also need to eat, that your body cannot make them in-house. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the machinery to do that, so we have to get them from our diet. With the fat, the obvious example is these omega-3 fatty acids that I know pretty much probably all of you have heard about, but also the omega-6 fatty acids. Both omega-3 and omega-6 are essential, so that means that we have to eat them in our diet to survive. If we don't eat them, we die. Then again, there are certain amino acids that we have to eat in our diet to survive. If we don't eat them, our body can't make them and we die. Carbohydrates, there's actually no dietary essentiality for carbohydrate. We don't have to eat any carbohydrates in our diet to survive. That does not mean we don't need some carbohydrate in our system to survive, but it means that our body is capable through a process called gluconeogenesis, meaning making glucose from things that are not glucose, basically. We can use fat or protein or fatty acids or amino acids to create new glucose in-house. Our body is capable of doing that. So all of the carbohydrate that we need to survive inside our body can make it on its own. There is literally no essentiality for carbohydrate from the diet. That's not me saying that you shouldn't eat carbohydrates though, at all. That's not what I mean. It just means that if you were out and as a wild human and you were in a time period or during a certain season or just a certain day when you couldn't get your hands on a whole lot of carbohydrate, you'd still survive. But if you didn't get your hands on some of these fatty acids or you couldn't get your hands on some of these amino acids over the long term, you could die. So that's kind of the thing. So our bodies are able to make carbohydrates in-house. One of the things I want to touch on actually, because I think it's a really interesting example, because people might wonder, well, why are there certain fats that we have to eat, or why are there certain amino acids we have to eat and not carbohydrates? Well, I think that probably has something to do with evolution. And because the sort of paleo model is an evolutionary nutrition model, this is where it kind of, I think we start to get to the point where does it make sense when we look at it through the lens of evolutionary science. And my favorite example to actually touch upon this is vitamin C. So we actually know that humans, when we were, as primates and stuff, we could make vitamin C in-house. We had the ability to do that. Somewhere along the way, we lost our ability to make vitamin C. There's basically been a break in the chain and we can't make it in-house anymore, and we now have to get it from our diet. Most likely how that happened was some kind of weird genetic mutation. It just flipped, some kind of gene mutation occurred, it was random, and now you had certain primates or humans who were no longer able to make vitamin C. But they were eating a diet that provided plenty of vitamin C, so it didn't really matter, right? If they couldn't make it in-house, but they were eating a diet high in vitamin C, they were still getting the vitamin C. Now, why did those particular primates survive? Probably because it required less energy from them. If you're eating a lot of vitamin C, then why would you want to waste the energy on making it internally? From an energetic perspective, from a conservation of energy perspective, which is part of the point, right? From an evolutionary perspective, is you want to expend as little energy as you can or as you have to, make smarter choices. The evolution is going to push that way as well. So again, it behooved the species that those who had this genetic mutation that did not have to make vitamin C in-house, that were eating enough, that they were the one who proliferated because their body was just more efficient. So now we're at a place where all humans cannot make vitamin C in-house, and so we have to get it from our diet. So the idea is that perhaps carbohydrates could be a similar thing. It could be that these fatty acids or proteins were a similar thing, is really more the better analogy, is that we got to a place where we were eating enough fat and we were eating enough protein that when there was some kind of weird, maybe interesting mutation that happened along the way, we were eating enough from our diet that it didn't really matter. And so then it was advantageous for those of the species who no longer had to make these fatty acids in-house or didn't have to make the amino acids in-house, that they survived. Because again, they're getting it from the diet. So you don't have to waste your energy on making it in-house. You can just eat it and then you get it. So what that kind of says is that we were eating enough of these proteins and these fats to supply the amino acids and the fatty acids in our diet. But that perhaps we never had a high enough dose of carbohydrate for the potential that if there was a genetic mutation that we would have survived without having the ability to make carbohydrates in-house. So that's sort of a theoretical look at it, but when you look at it from that evolutionary model, it starts to make sense. That part of the reason why we might need to constantly make carbohydrates in-house, or why we never, if we had a genetic mutation that if there was a genetic mutation along the way that sort of turned off that ability, that why that part of the species couldn't survive, it's because we were never consuming enough carbohydrates to make that a viable option. I know that might have been a little bit confusing. We might have gotten into the weeds a little bit. If it was confusing, please let me know and I'll clarify farther. But pretty much the idea is that there are things that we need to get that are essential in our diet, and those are not the same thing as things that are essential in our bodies. So yes, carbohydrates are essential in your body, but not in your diet. And one more time, that doesn't mean don't eat carbohydrates, because I don't want anybody getting all up in arms that I'm saying don't eat any carbs ever, because I love vegetables, I eat fruit. Carbohydrates are not the enemy, but I also don't want you thinking that if you are eating a diet that is lower in carbohydrate, because a real whole nutrient-dense diet is typically going to be lower in carbohydrate than a standard American diet. I don't want you to think that if you're doing that, you're somehow doing your body harm or you're not giving your body the nutrients it needs. You absolutely are, particularly if you're focusing on real foods, because it's really the micronutrients more than anything else that's missing from most of our diets. All right, hopefully that was clear. Kind of went a little bit deep on some of the evolutionary science there. If you've got questions, please send them to me. Again, if you need me to clarify, send those along as well. See y'all next time.